Good evening. I'm Jennifer Raab, and I have the enormous privilege of serving as president of Hunter College, where online or on campus, the American dream still comes true 150 years after our founding. Before we begin tonight's very special program, I want to once again express my gratitude to our Hunter students, faculty, and staff for continuing Hunter's proud tradition of education and excellence despite these challenging times. More than ever, you have embodied the historic Hunter motto, Mihi Cura Futuri, the care of the future is mine. Helping us to do that from the beginning of the seclusion of the COVID-19 pandemic has been our own Roosevelt House. Its virtual programming has provided frequent opportunities to convene online around the most critical issues of this unprecedented time in our country, including our nation's overdue reckoning with racial injustice and the ongoing public health crisis. In the last 2 weeks alone, Roosevelt House has hosted more than 1,000 attendees from the Hunter community and beyond for discussions of journalism's role in protecting our democracy, the evolution of Eleanor Roosevelt as an icon of international human rights, and a timely appraisal of the history and challenges of our nation's foreign policy. For those and so many other extraordinary programs, I want to extend my special thanks to the Jonathan F. Fanton, Director of Roosevelt House, Harold Holzer, who, in addition to his vital behind-the-scenes roles, will be part of tonight's program. Harold's leadership and expertise has helped to further establish Roosevelt House as a national hub for civic engagement on the most urgent matters of human rights and public policy. Roosevelt House has welcomed, in addition to countless renowned best-selling authors and experts, an extensive list of elected officials, including Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Dick Durbin, Congressman Jerry Nadler, former Congressman Barney Frank, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, and our own Governor Andrew Cuomo. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome another very special guest and devoted public servant, the senior senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown, a distinguished representative from a critical battleground state whose 2018 re-election to a third term inspired much speculation about a presidential bid. Senator Brown has remained a powerful and authentic voice on the most vital issues facing the nation, from income disparities to healthcare, voter suppression to racial injustice. With a calling to public service that began more than 4.5 decades ago, when he became the youngest ever elected to the Ohio House of Representatives, Senator Brown has made not just a career, but an entire life of fighting for equity and justice for the citizens of his state and beyond. We could not be more excited that Senator Brown has taken time tonight from his demanding Senate schedule to speak with us about his essential, entertaining, and enlightening book, Desk 88, 8 Progressive Senators Who Changed America. In it, Senator Brown employs a unique approach. He explores the legacy of some of the history-making progressives who sat at the same mahogany desk on the Senate floor that he has occupied for the last 13 years. It is truly a book only a sitting senator could have written. Through the stories of their endeavors to shape a better American tomorrow, Senator Brown weaves a dramatic chronicle of the successes and failures of the progressive idea throughout modern history. Along the way, Desk 88 offers a firm defense of key progressive policies like Social Security and Medicare, and acknowledging there is still much left to do, Desk 88 uses the history it recounts as the basis of a vision for a future of progress. First published to acclaim in November of 2019, the paperback edition of Desk 88 is updated with a new afterword by Senator Brown, addressing the many challenges of 2020, including the pandemic and the righteous indignation across the country over systemic racism. This new version brings renewed and timely attention to a book that speaks directly to this fraught and pivotal national moment. As Hillary Clinton put it, Sherrod Brown has always been a fighter for people and progress, and here he offers readers a window into the past that ties our shared history to the hard, important work that needs to be done to move our country forward. And as former Roosevelt House guest Douglas Brinkley added, Brown's elegant portraits of his desk 88 predecessors have marvelous historical value, especially the anecdotes illuminating the heroes' convictions and characters. To speak with Senator Brown about a career defined by conviction and character in his book, Desk 88, I'm delighted to welcome Roosevelt House Director Harold Holzer. As an author and historian, Harold has authored, co-authored, or edited more than 50 books on Lincoln and the Civil War. They include Lincoln and the Power of the Press, winner of the prestigious Gilder Lehrman Lincoln Prize, and his newest, The Presidents versus the Press, endless battle between the White House and the media from the founding fathers to fake news. Harold's work as an author and in higher education is informed by extensive experience in government and politics, working at one point as an aide to the late Governor Mario Cuomo and press secretary to the amazing Hunter alumna and Congresswoman Bella Abzug. Thank you, Harold and Senator Brown, for speaking with us tonight. And also thank you to our loyal and devoted Hunter community for joining us and for your emotional and financial support over these long pandemic months. Please welcome Harold Holzer in conversation with our special guest, Senator Sherrod Brown.
Good evening, everyone. Senator, let me add my welcome to that of President Raab. It's wonderful to see you. I wish we could have you at Roosevelt House in person and show you some of the historic walls and rooms that we treasure as much as you treasure your historic desk. We take inspiration from the house as much as you have from the setting where you're working for the people. So welcome.
I would love that. I will take you up on the offer in post-COVID times, so thank you.
That's great. And that brings us to...
Thank you, President Raab, too, very much for the kind words.
That brings us to the book, Desk 88, which I'm holding. And I've read. Really such an original idea, a terrific concept.
Thanks.
I'm amazed no one thought of it before. Senator Durbin once took me on a tour of those desks with my grandson in hand, and all roads led to Senator Obama's desk, where apparently they keep candy because that's what the kids ask for. Where is President Obama's desk? So these are great stories, and you've made this both a history tour and a civic lesson, not only biographies of key senators, but also updates on the issues that animated their careers and still concern us. So let me start with the great story, or ask you to tell the great story that begins the book. You come to the Senate in January, your first term as a freshman, to pick a desk. Tell us what that moment was like and what happened.
Sure, we had sat on the Senate floor for orientation. There were 10 freshmen, 9 was one of those years, 9 Democrats and 1 Republican. That may be a harbinger for 2020, but we'll see. But then they told us that, as you would expect, lots of things are by seniority. The committee assignments are mostly by seniority. Where your office is in the Hart or the Hart or the Russell or the Dirksen building, and where you sit on the floor. So when it was our turn, there were 10 desks left that the other 90 members had not chosen. And someone had told me early in the, I don't know, maybe the week I got there, that senators carved their names in their desk drawers. You pull out the desk drawer. And so I began to look around at these desks, and I didn't really care where I sat. I wasn't sitting behind a post at Old Yankee Stadium. I was sitting in the Senate, so the views are all unobstructed. So as I about the 3rd or 4th desk I pulled out, I just looked at the names. It was Hugo Black, Alabama, George McGovern, South Dakota, Al Gore Sr., just said Al Gore, not senior then, but Al Gore, Tennessee. And then it just said one word, Kennedy. So Ted sat 4 or 5 chairs away, and I walked over, I said, Ted, come here a second, would you? And he walks over, I said, I said, which brother is this? He said, well, it's gotta be Bobby's because I have Jack's desk. So, he got to choose before I did by about 5 terms, 5 6-year terms, but, and it was his brother, but I just started looking at the names, and I've always believed, and you'll appreciate this as a Lincoln scholar, I've always believed that you can do your job better if you know what came before you. And I like the history of the Senate. I didn't know a lot. I mean, I I was in politics, I knew things, but my wife went on and ordered like 10 or 15 books about the Senate. And I started reading older books and newer books and started reading biographies of these senators. I read about 160 books and took me 10 years to write this. I have a day job, obviously, and I was in no hurry to write it. And the best or the worst part of the story, my wife is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. She's a really, really good writer. She just finished her first novel called Daughters of Erie-Town, came out a few months ago. And she, we talked a lot about it, but she didn't really read the manuscript until I thought I was done about 5 years ago. And she read it and she said, "You're half done." And that was not a good week. That was not a good week, obviously, for Dr. Holzer, for our marriage. But then she said, "You got to put more of yourself into it. Anybody could write 8 biographies, but you've got to. And then I started writing essays about each senator connected to me, connected to the times. It's not at all a memoir. It's more of a history, but it's got enough of me in it to give it a uniqueness that a non-senator couldn't have written.
Well, each chapter, for those who are curious and haven't gotten the book, and I should, as long as you plugged your wife's book, I will plug your book. If our viewers go on the chat room function here, you can not only order the book from our Hunter bookstore, Shakespeare and Company, but you can get it with the book plate signed by Senator Brown. So that's a nice addition. So please do that. And just a reminder, because we didn't get to do the housekeeping at the beginning, we will have a Q&A at the end of the talk. So begin whenever you're ready out there to stack your questions in the Q&A function of your computers, your laptops. By the way, you dedicate your book to your mother, your late mother, Emily Campbell Brown, right? And you describe her as a small town Southern girl who taught my brothers and me about service and justice. Just piqued my curiosity. I wonder if you'll share some of that inspiration.
Yeah, and my mom also, sure. I mean, I'm in politics because my mother, I have these progressive views because my mother, she was the first, the story of her and my family was really the first chapter, the first essay after the Hugo Black chapter. And I began that chapter by saying, like Hugo Black, my mom was a child of the segregated South. She was born in 1920. She always cared about civil rights. She tells a story where she got to pick up since you worked for Bell Abzug, you would have known, I assume, Shirley Chisholm, and my mom got to pick up Shirley Chisholm at the airport once to speak to the YWCA. My mom said next to the Urban League and the NAACP was the best longtime civil rights organization in the country, the YW. But my mom told a story, and this always stuck with me. I mentioned this in the book. During all the forced busing for racial integration of the schools, controversy, if you will, in the 60s and 70s, my mom one time said, Sherrod, and Sherrod's my mother's father's name, so my name is Southern, and my heritage is, my mom's from Mansfield, Georgia, my dad from Mansfield, Ohio. They met at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington when my dad came back from the war and settled in the North. But my mom said, I remember busing in the South. It's when Black kids were bused were sent across town in an old rickety bus, past the new white school and went to the inferior Black school without many textbooks. And that so put race into a perspective. My mom voted, always was a Democrat, but she didn't think for a moment about voting for the Southern Democrat in 1948, Strom Thurmond. She voted for Harry Truman in her not her first vote, but my dad was always interested in a good citizen, and my dad went from a Barry Goldwater voter in 64 to a McGovern voter in 72. And there weren't too many people that did that. But my mom really is, that's why I dedicate to my mom, because it was always about justice for her.
That's great. So the book focuses or begins with 8 different senators, pretty diverse group by region, and I would say by class anyway. Got some really wealthy guys in there and some who started at the bottom. A one-time Klansman who became a progressive, members of several great political families, 2 outspoken anti-war senators. You deal with, I was interested, you deal with a few senators who weren't very popular with their colleagues, which made their work hard. So we can't get to everyone, I'm sure, but I wanted, if it's okay, to focus on the senators who had, at least to start with, the senators who had some connection to FDR, because we're metaphorically or symbolically speaking from Roosevelt House tonight. And what could be more timely than to talk about Hugo Black? You call him a complicated but necessary inclusion in the book, because, as you point out, he began in his youth as a member of the Klan, and in a moment when many of us, maybe not enough of us, are focused on the Supreme Court. Hugo Black was the first senator in 55 years to be elevated to the court. He was FDR's first appointment. So tell us about how you feel about this evolutionary senator from Alabama.
Yeah, Hugo Black was, it's hard to think you'd put somebody that was a Klansman in a list of progressive senators. He was, and I'd like to say it was just his youth, Dr. Holzer, but it was also, he ran as a senator ran for the Senate in 1926. He was a young man, but he wasn't that young. And he ran with the endorsement of the Klan, or at least the support of the Klan, if there were not a official endorsement. Through his first term, he voted wrong on lynching. But something happened. He was reelected. Some called him the most radical member of the Senate. He was a very learned man. He read all the time. I think the more you learn, the more you should, if guided, turn away from prejudice and bigotry and hatred. I don't know hatred with him, but anyway, he became the most outspoken and most effective, next to the senator from New York, Senator Wagner, proponent of labor rights on the 8-hour workday, but he moved so far on race that by he helped to write the Brown v. Board of Education decision in the 50s, and he was later that year burned in effigy in Tuscaloosa at the law school which he attended. So he wasn't an honored graduate of that law school, even though he's Supreme Court justice. He was burned in effigy because he turned against what he was earlier in life on race. He still had blemishes, we all do, but he traveled the first. But Bobby Kennedy was one of the 8, as I'd said earlier, and Bobby Kennedy worked for McCarthy. Al Gore was mixed on civil rights, and then by his third term, he made a decision that he took on interest groups on a progressive corporate tax. He took on Johnson of the Vietnam War. He took on Nixon on race and Supreme Court, knowing that he could lose, and he did. And so as they got older, most of them got more courageous. I'll say that. They realized there's more to life than just winning another term or running for president, perhaps.
There were people who evolve on the bench. They used to, anyway. People who surprise up to Souter, I suppose.
Yeah, Souter, certainly, yeah.
And Earl Warren.
And Whizzer White kind of went the other way a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. I found it interesting that you remind us in your chapter, I'm not putting you on the spot on this issue, but in his final Senate period, Black was one of Roosevelt's few supporters on court packing.
Right.
You think that played any role in his being elevated to the court?
I don't know. I'm not a scholar, and I don't know. But I think he was close to Roosevelt. He was in the room, and Pat Leahy, the senator from Vermont, who's been here since 1974, the longest serving senator in the Senate right now. Pat was sat at a dinner with Hugo Black when Pat was, I believe, at Georgetown Law School, and Black was still on the court. And Black told the story. We all know the story that Big Jim Farley, I believe, was credited with saying to Roosevelt when the returns came in 1936, as Maine goes, that it used to be as Maine goes, so goes the nation, because Maine had its governor's race in September. And so if Maine was flipping, then maybe the country would. But Farley looked at FDR as FDR lost 2 states to Alf Land and said, as Maine goes, so goes Vermont. Hugo Black corrected Leahy when he recounted that story, and Black said, I'm the one that said that to FDR. Well, history can't solve that riddle, but it does show that Black was pretty close to FDR personally, and I think that had a whole lot to do with it. And I think FDR liked what Black did on labor rights. I think that had something to do with it.
And you follow the Black chapter, as you do each of your chapters, with a rumination on something you take from him. and apply to the current moment. And I think you described him as an innovator and not a conservator.
Yeah.
And that's where you put him. I also noticed that you talked about, he focused on the right of every laboring person to a living wage. That's not too far from you and the dignity of work, is it?
Yeah, I think that's who I am and what I think the role of government is in many ways. How do we create a society that's racially blind and honors the dignity of work? And when I talk about the dignity of work, I mean the essential grocery store worker, bus driver, middle class clerk, whoever, that if you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work, and dignity of work. I mean, I talk about the presidential race and what Biden, I think that there's something to his beliefs and positions that way too. But I'll go back real quick to what you said about Black as an innovator. Emerson, one of my favorite Emerson quotes is Emerson said that history is a battle between the innovators and the conservators. The conservators are today's conservatives that want to hold their privilege close to them, and innovators are those who are progressives. And there's always a tension, regardless of political party or era. There's a tension between those two. In all of the 8, and keep in mind, these are all 8 white men. I acknowledge that. That's who was in the Senate through most of the last 120 years. But these were all innovators struggling against conservators to move the country forward. All 8 of these senators were.
So let's spend a few minutes on Franklin Roosevelt's lieutenant governor, who had a mixed political career, but is remembered very fondly in New York. And of course, I mean Herbert Lehman, who, as you quote Senator Javits saying, was a rich man who, throughout his political career, was a champion of those who had no money, no status, and virtually no chance of gaining either. But he was also kind of dull and austere. You point that out, and wealthy and privileged, but still cared about the common people. What attracted you to Lehman, aside from the fact that it was on you? You could have chosen others, but
yeah, I could have. Lehman has such a history in New York, and obviously the firm that his father started, Meyer Lehman. I'm forgetting the father, and his father was, I forget, he was nephew or his father and uncle started it. He just because he was so central, he did the Little New Deal in New York State. As Roosevelt's lieutenant governor, he became governor. I think you could argue he may have been the best governor in New York history. Some would say Rockefeller, some maybe present day, I don't know. But Herbert Lehman made such a difference as the Little New Deal. Then he went off to Congress, and someone asked me in a book talk the other day, about Lehman tilting at windmills in this. And I said, well, first of all, he was a very good governor that accomplished much. In the Senate, he accomplished less, but what he did was try to continue to prick the conscience of the Senate on race, on immigration a little bit, but on race especially. And he took on McCarthy. There's a scene in the book where I just was speaking to Herbert Lehman's nephew, who's an 80-something-year-old man in Boston, about this. And he was actually in the gallery when this happened, when he went over and took on McCarthy, and McCarthy just sneered at him with this high-pitched laugh that was McCarthy was known as. And I mean, the fear of McCarthy in the Senate was palpable. It's a little bit like the fear I saw during impeachment. My desk is right across the aisle from the Republicans, and how Republicans wouldn't even stand up today to this president on the issue of should there be witnesses at the impeachment. And they denied even witnesses. And I watched one meek Republican after another spineless Republican in the Senate, not even willing to stand up to Trump on that. And then I contrast that with Herbert Lehman, who is, and how the people, all the McCarthy supporters, including the Democrats who were scared of him. And it was a good moment for him and for our country. And I mean, not a good moment for him. He was a bit humiliated, or tried to be, by McCarthy.
Just to remind our local viewers about his electoral history, he beat, and it's very possible that our board member, advisory board member, Ambassador Bill Vanden Heuvel, is on the Zoom tonight. And
I
so
hope so.
you'll have to forgive us because the person that Lehman beat for governor was Bill's mentor, Wild Bill Donovan. That was one of his early mentors, the founder of the OSS. So, but then he lost for Senate to a guy who we barely remember today, Irving Ives, and then he beat John Foster Dulles in it's quite an electoral route. Did you have the same office as he as well? Is that in the book?
No, I'd not have. Oh yeah, I won my first term. I think those records are not very organized, and they're available, but they're not very reliable. And I think that Lehman, I believe in the Russell building, Lehman had that, but they reconfigured the offices so much. But the ambassador, I know the ambassador. I know his daughter. I met him many years ago and send him good wishes. I hope that he's on the call. And my mother worked for Wild Bill Donovan, although she didn't really know him. She worked at OSS when she came. That's what it was, right? OSS.
Yes.
When she came to Washington from teaching school in Florida. And she, I don't know if she ever even met Donovan, but she worked at that agency as a secretary during the war.
Well, Bill traveled with him. We hope he's on. Just celebrated his 90th birthday, and he's doing.
I did well. Good. I'm glad to hear that. I did not know that Donovan was his mentor. I didn't know that.
You also served on the same committee as Lehman, right? Health.
Yes,
Health,
correct.
Education and Labor. So did that create an extra kinship?
No, not particularly. I mean, you because it's committees define senators less than they do House members, and with Lehman, it really was his just his strength of character. He lost a son during World War II. I am sure that informed him. Again, I've gotten to know his. I know two of his nephews, and I got some personal insight, but not enough in my conversations. One of them has passed away. But Lehman was a very kind man, a gentle man. As you said, not terribly exciting, was not a particularly charismatic speaker. But he was beloved by so many. He was not necessarily beloved in the Senate. And I mean, you can see that the prejudice aimed at a Jewish senator from New York, though some of those prejudices are still around and maybe always will be. You could kind of sense that with, and such an outspoken advocate for civil rights. So the Richard Russells and the Talmadges and the Bilbos of the world didn't have much use for him.
I like particularly the section where you say that Lyndon Johnson, in the early days of his leadership of the caucus, did not love to give Lehman the time he wanted because it was just going to be a fight with one of the Southern guys. So he was not exactly a big advocate for Lehman in his early days.
But Lehman, I believe I wrote, this was written, it was published a year ago. So I believe it was that Lehman was the first person either to visit or call Johnson after his heart attack.
Yeah.
Johnson always, after that, he appreciated Lehman a bit more. He still wasn't all that nice to him, they say, but Lehman, but that sounds like something Lehman would do from reading a lot about him.
So I like the way you pivoted off of the Lehman chapter to mention that, to talk about bailouts. Again, something that's very much in the news again. And you say that obviously Senator Lehman would not have recognized the Lehman brothers that got into such trouble in 07 and 08, and you use this, the balance on how you construct aid during a crisis. Does it all go to business? Does it go to states? Does it go to individuals? So the paperback has just come out, but it's already doubly timely because of all the discussion of phase 4 of the bailout.
Yeah, and the bailout was very different under Obama than what we did, and that's when I began to write the Lehman. And that may have been part of the reason I chose Lehman. I don't remember exactly, but back in 2008 and 9, when I was first thinking about the book, because we were talking about the Lehman Brothers company, which he had nothing to do with in the last part of his life. I mean, no connection, no working everyday connection. But you can see with this last round of back when we passed the CARES Act in March, which the CARES Act, by one study, kept 12 million people out of poverty, but hundreds of thousands are falling into poverty now every week because we've essentially not renewed the CARES Act, the unemployment benefit, the help for people about to be evicted, the assistance for education so they can reopen safely, all those things in local governments and small businesses. But there's a bias with this administration and during this COVID package to help the big guys a lot more than the smaller companies. And that's not a surprise to anybody that's listening, I assume, and not a surprise to us. But it was so hastily put together, as these often are, that you can't always be as precise as you want to, and you still have the administration, the executive branch still has say over implementation, of course.
I want to make sure we spend a little time covering another New York senator who sat at desk 88. You mentioned him at the beginning, Robert Kennedy. You note that Eleanor Roosevelt was not a great fan of Robert Kennedy's, probably because of his McCarthy period, but Eleanor wasn't a great fan of John Kennedy's either. She famously said in either 1959 or 1960, she said, "I wish there was a little less profile and a little more courage." So she was pretty tough.
I never heard that. That is a good line.
Is that a great line?
Yeah, it's a good line.
Kennedy is like, Bobby has faded into iconic, not faded, but risen into iconic status now, of course, in the 50 years since he was assassinated. By the way, that was my first involvement in politics in the Young Queens Democrats in 1964.
Oh, in 64 race, not 68. Okay.
No, I was a teenager. Well, I was a teenager in both years, but no, 64, when he ran for Senate in New York. And he ran way behind the Johnson ticket. It was a tough
Way
fight.
behind, right.
Yeah. So tell us about the Kennedy you learned about as a senator. He didn't spend much. He wasn't a senator for all that long, 3.5 years.
Yeah, Bobby never liked the Senate. He didn't really want to be there particularly. He was traumatized the rest of his life, the last 5 years of his life, I think, still by his brother's assassination. He never thought he'd run for office. I think he was in his brother's shadow in so many ways. But all three Kennedys, and I would argue Ted Kennedy is the best senator in U.S. history. I'd put him above Hubert Humphrey, but not by a whole lot. But Ted Kennedy, to each of the Kennedy brothers, the three brothers, none of them were particularly good at their jobs in their early parts of their career. Ted was not especially good senator his first decade and a half or so, but then became, as I would argue, the best senator maybe in history. Bobby worked for McCarthy, and Bobby was not, he bugged Dr. King's phone. He was a kind of an SOB to a lot of people. And then after his brother's assassination, he came into his own, and his empathy was unparalleled among elected officials. And I tell the story of Marion Wright Edelman, then Marion Wright, who didn't like the Kennedys at all because John nominated as president conservative segregationist judges in the South because they had to pass Eastland's Judiciary Committee. And the good civil rights judges in the 50s and 60s came from Eisenhower. In the 50s, came from Eisenhower into the 60s. But she had no use for Bobby until she saw him in a broken down hut in the Mississippi Delta, and how he interacted with poor African American children. And Jack, you can argue, wasn't very much of a senator either. So they all three of them were much better in their later lives and were great public servants in their last years.
And the issue that your takeout issue from the Bobby chapter is healthcare. Really Teddy's thing, I guess, more than Robert Kennedy's. So that's something you've been passionate about in your 2 terms plus in the Senate, and I guess is on everybody's mind. How do you summarize the Kennedy legacy in healthcare, and why is it important?
Well, in 1999, I was in the House, and I did a news conference with Bill Clinton and Ted Kennedy and Senator Moynihan, your state senator at the time, announcing Medicare, a bill to do Medicare at 55, that it wasn't Medicare for all, it was an option if you're 58 years old and you live in Youngstown or you live in in Buffalo and you lose your job, your plant closes down, you can go on Medicare earlier. And we worked out the financing in a way that it was revenue neutral and accessible to people. And Ted helped with that in a big way. We almost had it as part of the Affordable Care Act. We fell a vote short when Senator Lieberman changed his vote. But I think Kennedy's legacy is he kept healthcare. Bobby wasn't much of a player, and each of those chapters, they didn't have to be exactly about that senator. I used it to talk about what I wanted to talk about in my book. I guess I could, but Teddy really kept the whole issue of healthcare alive. And unfortunately, he was sick as we were doing the Affordable Care Act. Senator Dodd did a good job as chair of the committee you mentioned that Lehman was on too, but Teddy could have been different if Ted had been there, in part because he was so good reaching outside the institution and helping to build coalitions and helping to bring attention to an issue, not just a good mechanic inside the Senate.
One more senator, and then I'll ask you a couple of closing questions before we go to Q&A. I knew nothing about Glen Taylor of Idaho, who, according to your report, once said that offered to crown Eleanor Roosevelt as the Queen of Liberia, which I guess was a kind of a racist reference, but then turned out to be a progressive who was fighting Bilbo. Just tell us a little bit about that.
He was made clear. He was quoting Bilbo saying that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm relieved.
Yeah.
I told you I knew nothing, so I just proved it.
Nor did I. And Glen Taylor became maybe my favorite part of the book to write because I knew nothing about him and nobody knew anything about him, and it was hard to find out. There's one book written about him, one book written by him. He was, and I'll make this brief, but he and his wife, Dora Taylor, started the Glen Taylor and Dora, the Glendora Singers. They had a son, and baseball fans watching will maybe appreciate this. Their son's name was Dora spelled backwards, A-Rod. And A-Rod was an only child at the time. He was running around. He'd do these musical shows. That's how he made his living. He passed the hat, he'd do a show driving around rural Idaho. Weren't many people in Idaho in those days. And he saw a politician, a guy running for governor that he thought wasn't as good a speaker as he was. So he was always a progressive, a pretty leftist guy. And he runs for the Senate. He had a one-loss record, I believe, of 1 win and 6 losses. He was the running mate for why am I forgetting his name? Wallace. Help me, Wallace. Henry Wallace. He was the running mate for Henry Wallace in 1948. He went to Alabama to campaign. He very purposely went to speak to integrated audiences in Birmingham in 1948. He was arrested by the police force of Bull Connor. He was sent to the Birmingham jail, and somehow I found out where A-Rod Taylor was a retired dentist, and I reached him. He lived in Orange County. He was suspicious when I called because he just thought this could go nowhere good because his father was pretty criticized by a lot of people because of his progressive politics. Anyway, and he said to me as we were talking about his dad being in the Birmingham jail, he said, my dad was in the Birmingham jail when Martin Luther King was still in high school, referring, of course, to the letter from the jail. And Taylor took on his third year in office, his first day, his third year, he took on the most heinous segregationist Democrat named Theodore Bilbo. And he's the one that made the quote about Eleanor Roosevelt. And he's just a horrible human being by any measurement. And he took him on, he stopped him from being seated for a period of months. And Bilbo then died of cancer. But Taylor was a gutsy guy, had almost no African-Americans in his state, but he believed in civil rights and he went down fighting. He kept losing elections because of his politics mostly. And he was a character.
Right. Well, there have been more than one singer in the Senate. So
that's correct. Yeah.
Good to know there's been one on your side of the aisle.
Right.
I learned something else today that I don't know why I don't know this or didn't know it until your wonderful book publicist mentioned it, that I was wondering, and I guess a few other people were wondering, well, why is Senator Brown hanging out at this desk, even though he's gaining in seniority, he's in his third term? And she told me that the desk moves.
Yeah.
You keep the desk, but it goes into different sections. I had no idea. I
Well,
learned.
why would you know and why would you care? But yes. So it stays on our side of the aisle, although there was one period, there were so many Democratic senators in 1937 after the third Roosevelt, 32,
Yeah.
34, 36, that they had a row of Democratic seats on the Republican side. But that you have to have about 70 seats for that. And that's not likely to happen anytime soon in a divided country.
So my big question before we turn it over to Q&A, I'm sure we have a few of these lined up, but I get to ask it. Have you scratched your name in the drawer?
I did, and I did it on the first day of my third swearing in when all my thank God I didn't mean thank God, it's not that important, but thank goodness that I did because the pandemic came soon after and my 6 of my 7 grandchildren were there. We rode over on the Senate train. They thought the train was more interesting than grandpa carving something in an old piece of furniture. But I took the drawer out, or the Senate staff took the drawer out. The woman who works on the staff, how the Senate archivist had blue hospital gloves on, the gloves you see now all the time with COVID, and it put it in there. And you take what's called an awl, an AWL, and you scratch your name first. Then you pencil where you're going to write it, and then you scratch it with the awl, and then you get a black marker, a magic marker, a felt tip, whatever, and you color it in. And so it was, I mean, my whole family was there, and almost my whole family. And it was just a wonderful moment.
It's a great ritual. And by the way, I got to see you seated at the desk. I attended one day of the 1 hour actually of the impeachment trial.
Okay.
And I think I saw you from the back because we were on that side. So we didn't get to see you, but there you were.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. So we're going to bring on our curator of programs, Mac Barrett, who has some questions from our audience.
Mr. Barrett, how are you? Thank you.
Hello, Harold. Yes, we do have some good questions that have been coming in throughout the discussion, and I'll share a few of those with you now. The first one from Katrina Vanden Heuvel, publisher of The Nation and a friend of Roosevelt House. She says, first of all, that she's a big fan of Connie Schultz, and she asks, do you believe Ohio may go for Joe Biden, and why has the great state you have represented so well as a true progressive populist gone, quote, red in last years?
Katrina, thank you, and hello to your father, and I'm so sorry about your loss just a few weeks ago. So thank you for the question. Yes, Ohio can absolutely go for Biden. Biden fits the state. I mean, you see Scranton. I mean, it's sort of Mansfield or Toledo. I think he's the most pro-worker candidate for president in either party in a generation. I think he's made the contrast really sharply between dignity of work and Trump's betrayal of workers. And that puts Ohio into play. The suburbs in Columbus and Cincinnati are overwhelming. Cleveland always have been, but overwhelmingly moving away from Trump. I think black turnout goes up this year from 16, and Trump won the state by 8 points. So it's a climb. It's a lot harder than Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania. But just we run close in Ohio, we win those other 3 states. And I think, I mean, my fight is to win Ohio, because then it can be, I think it'll be termed an electoral college landslide. And that means then that what Trump does after the election has even less basis. And second, it'll make it easier to govern next year if we have an electoral college landslide. Why is Ohio more conservative? Because the decline, you'll understand this, Katrina, because you care so much about this, because of the decline of unions in the state. And unions are what makes, union, that's also been a wage stagnation in the state because of the decline of unions. And my state's not getting younger, it's getting slightly older. It's what makes Pennsylvania hard to win, because everything west of Harrisburg is a lot like Ohio. It's not attracting a lot of new young people, and the people that are there are older, and we're not getting a particularly diverse group of people moving into the state. So it's all demographic. Somebody said to me, the Midwest is getting more Republican, but isn't there yet. The South's getting more Democratic, but isn't there yet. And look at North Virginia, then North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, then look at sort of Western PA, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. So we can still win elections in the Midwest, it's just harder.
Here's a question from Francine Shore. First, she points out that the average life expectancy when the Constitution was written is 37 years old. The framers never imagined Supreme Court judges would have a life expectancy of 87. Hence, shouldn't the court appointments for life be modified to a shorter term of service?
That is a really interesting question. I've never heard that about 37. That's pretty remarkable. I think that I know one thing's going to happen after the election. If the Democrats win the Senate, the Judiciary Committee, and I've talked a lot to Sheldon Whitehouse. President Raab mentioned he's been here before, and he's one of the most thoughtful, smart people in the Senate and a leader in judiciary, as you saw probably during the hearings. I assume many of you were tuned into that. And I would assume that whether it's Senator Durbin, whom you had mentioned, who is a very good writer, by the way, Professor Holzer, I mean, a very good writer, one of the best in the Senate, and writes his own stuff. Again, not a common thing in the Senate. But whether it's whoever's chair of the committee, I think is going to be very aggressive about pointing out the corruption in the court, the number of 5-4 decisions, 80 decisions have been 5-4 in the last few years, always the same 5, always the same 4. I mean, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg being one of the 4. And the Republicans have flipped people with Kennedy to Kavanaugh. But so, and I think that one of the things we'll consider then is, do you add, I mean, then we make some decisions when the public sees how corrupt the court has been. If you remember when Scalia died, he was on a ranch and he was on a trip that was paid for by somebody who had been in front of the court. And that was a matter, he did that kind of thing all the time, but Supreme Court justices don't have to report things like that. Senators do, House members do, we all should. So I think the public's going to learn more and more about the inner machinations and the role of dark in the court and the role of dark money on the court. And I think the public will then demand some changes. It could be term limits, it could be size of court, it could be, I'm not a lawyer, so bear with me here, it could be the jurisdiction of what kinds of cases the court can take. I think once the public learns about, through hearings, what the court has become, I think you'll see some demand for change.
W. Hubbard asks, if asked, would you accept a cabinet position in a Biden White House, perhaps as Secretary of Labor?
No, I have no interest. I thought about running for president 2 years ago. I didn't for a lot of reasons. Mostly, I don't think I have quite the ambition you need to put everything aside and do that. There's an old saying that there was a secret ballot taken in the Senate on who should be the next president. It was a 100-way tie for first. So there is certainly those, but I love what I'm doing. I don't want to give the Republican governor an appointment in the Senate, in a Senate that will likely be pretty closely divided in 2021. But plus, I love this job. I think I can advocate as chair of the Banking and Housing Committee better for my state and for the country than being another cabinet member. So none of that interests me.
Elliot David asks, do you ever face difficulty balancing your desire to vote your conscience versus voting by popular opinion? In other words, what you feel is best might contradict with the preference of a majority of your constituents. How do you handle such situations?
Yeah, that's the old political science. Are you a delegate or are you a representative? Do the voters delegate you to vote your conscience, or is your job to always represent what they think? And first of all, you never really know what voters think. I mean, you get mail, you get emails, you get calls, you go out and you do town halls, you do all those things, but you never really know. But I think I win Ohio because people know I'm gonna fight for what I think is right. And people know in my campaigns what my political philosophy is and what my way of doing business. And I think that, I mean, I'll say it this way. I'll answer with this real quick story. In 2000, I was at the Ford plant, auto plant, assembly plant in Avon Lake, Ohio. I was in the Congress then, in the House. And we're sitting around a table with 7 or 8 auto workers during a break. And they were union activists. They were pretty engaged. And we're talking about the presidential election. This was October 2000. And one guy said, how are you all voting between Gore and Bush? And Gore. One guy was voting for Bush. And the guy next to me said, why are you voting for Bush? And the guy said, well, Gore wants to take your gun. And the other guy said, well, you vote for Brown and he wants to take your gun too. And the guy said, yeah, but Brown fights for what I believe and he fights for workers. And I mean, I will always have an F from the NRA. I've been for marriage equality for 25 years. And I've always been 100% pro-choice. The voters know that. And I will not part from that. Life's too short for that. So I think if you're authentic, if you explain why you're voting a certain way, I mean, there are plenty of people. I'll never win Ohio with 60% of the vote. That's just never going to happen. I'd be happy with 54 or 5. It's a tough state. But when you're strong on those issues, there are certain people that will never consider voting for me. I get that.
Barbara S. asks, were there any holders of the desk who you found particularly unworthy?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't think so. There were a few that I'm serving with now, and I certainly wouldn't comment on them, but I didn't want to write about. One of the people said, why didn't you write about Russ Feingold? Because he was a strong progressive, held the desk. But I served with him, and I just wanted to make that break that I didn't. McGovern's the only one I actually knew of the 8 senators, and I got to know McGovern pretty well the last 10 years of his life. My first big campaign as a college student was his 72 race. There's nobody I find is particularly heinous in that group. There were a couple segregationist Southern senators that I didn't really bother researching much. I didn't do a really deep dive. I wouldn't have liked their politics, but I didn't really know enough about them personally. I mean, beyond their politics.
Tony Badger asks, when do you think that bipartisan cooperation ended, and do you envision that tradition of working across the aisle ever returning?
Yeah, it's still there on a number of issues, but it's not there on the big things. I mean, another senator in Ohio is a conservative Republican, votes with leadership on everything, never criticizes Trump. We work on Lake Erie issues together. We find ways to work on the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton. I mean, we'll find things to work on, but I first of all, I never romanticized the past. In the 1950s, when Herbert Lehman was there, 95 white men and 1 white woman couldn't pass civil rights. So I don't go back and romanticize the past when it was all people that look like the 3 of us. Actually, the 2 of us that are two of us that are older rather than the younger guy. But I think that my hope is that, I mean, I think we're going to win this year. I think we're going to win the Senate. I mean, the Democrats are going to win the Senate and the White House. I think we're going to be smarter than generally you win the Senate and the White House and you take a bath the next 2 years later. I think we're going to be a lot smarter this year. I have a bunch of ideas about that. I won't share now unless you want. And if we win again in 2022, I think then this party of Trump begins some real self-examination. I don't think they'll begin to do self-examination after the 20 election, when even if we decisively beat Trump. I just don't think they have it in them with the Trump base to do that. But perhaps 2 elections in a row will make them realize they can't just be the privileged white guys party and throw a few bones to working class white guys and really do nothing for them except shout and betray. That I think we may see a better time that way. But it's been that for more than a decade now. I mean, McConnell was never going to let Biden or Obama succeed in any way he could prevent, for sure.
Okay, last question, and it combines 2, one from Johnny Rivera and the other from Kathleen Kenny. And you just alluded to this, but Johnny asks, do you think that the Democrats will win the Senate? And Kathleen adds, do you agree that just enough Democrats is enough?
Well, I mean, I'd like 60, but we're not going to have 60. I worry if it's 51 or 2. It gives. I won't mention names, but you can figure out who they are. It gives 2 or 3 Democrats a little bit too much veto power over a lot of things. Keep in mind, I mean, the parties back in the days when Dr. Holzer asked about Glen Taylor and Bilbo from Mississippi. The parties were, there were liberal pro-civil rights Republicans, there were segregationist Southern ultra-conservative Democrats. The parties have really sorted. There are no moderate Republicans now. Susan Collins occasionally votes with us, usually when we don't need it. Lisa Murkowski, whose office is about 3 people away here. Lisa Murkowski is actually kind of a moderate, but that's it. And there are no really conservative Democrats. There's nobody in the party, even a moderate Southern Democrat of the 1970s or 80s. They're not. The parties have really sorted. The public has really sorted. That's one reason we have such a divided in my state on 88 counties. I won my race by 7 points in 2018. Of 88 counties, I won 16 of them. I won the metro counties, the university counties, in the Lake Erie sort of touristy, a little more liberal counties. So the voters have sorted in so many ways. They've sorted almost geographically, within states, they've sorted parties. There is, I would think, for instance, in Texas, Biden's maybe competitive in Texas. Texas has, I think, 230 or something counties, something like that. I would assume Biden wins 10 of them, or maybe 15 of them that are Latino in the South. But I don't know that. But I'm just saying that's kind of how politics has become, this self-sorting of voters of who your friends are. I would assume most people watching this, if most of you are Biden voters, I should make assumptions, but I guess I think that most of you probably don't hang around a whole lot with Trump voters. You may have a crazy uncle, I don't know, but it's just a sorting we've done as a nation, making bipartisanship that much harder. But I do think we get back to that day at some point.
That's great. I should point out that Katrina Vanden Heuvel also wrote in to remind us of the importance of the language we use and that it's not court packing, it's court reform.
Yes, I appreciate that. And the real court packing has been Mitch McConnell, court packing for 4 years. And what McConnell did was block in the last year and a half of Obama. So there were so many vacancies for him to fill. And that's the story. That's what Mitch McConnell, the Senate has quit legislating. And that's a tragedy. If you look at these 8, they were all accomplished one way or the other. Some were better than others, legislators, but those days, that to me is the more important issue than is their bipartisanship, is there actually legislation in the future. And I think the Democrats win the Senate. There's the issue of the filibuster that we work through. And then we begin to do real things that matter in people's lives.
Well, this has been excellent. Thank you so much, Senator Brown. We'll wrap up. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, just thank you. And thanks to President Raab, and thanks to Roosevelt. In Hunter College, this was an honor to get to do this and to have this kind of a spirited, high-level conversation. And Professor Holzer, thank you for the way you did it. And Mr. Barrett, thank you for the way you did it.
Senator, you give special meaning to the phrase dignity of work. We're really honored to have had you with us.
Thank you. How kind of you. Thank you, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Night. See ya.